Thank you for having me here once again. And right at the start, at my beginning with a story. I love stories. Mark Pope is an American who was born in the 1940s in Texas. He was destined to live a really extraordinary life, but before that, he had to be acquainted with the dark side of extraordinary. He was a very active child growing up and misbehaved very frequently. One day, after being severely hit by the teacher with a wooden paddle, he told himself, "This world is full of people who will hurt you, who don't care about others, only about their rules. And I will not obey those rules made by people who don't really care about others. I will do whatever I want." So of course that led to an early life of criminal behavior. By the age of 12, he had already stole his first car and ran away from home. By the age of 22, he had been arrested a dozen times and locked up for 7 out of 9 years in either detention homes, reform school, psychiatric wards, or county jails. Actually, at the age of 22, the Texas Department of Corrections labeled him as incorrigible. It's just that in Spanish it's incorregible. My girls pick on me. So. And he was assigned to a maximum security ward for a 2-year period. In that ward, it was very harsh. Inmates were supposed to get up every morning at 6:30 and go out to the fields and work long hours with access, just clearing the fields and being in total silence. In this type of maximum security units, the worst crime you can ever commit is to refuse to work. That's really the worst thing you can do, just refuse to work. If you do, you're going to be sent to the hole. That's solitary confinement that we've seen in movies where there's no bunk, no mattress, no light, and a hole where inmate's supposed to do his bodily functions and hardly any food. Thank God that Mark never was sent to the hole. However, he was noticing that this particular guy who looked like a librarian and seemed very calm was very weak, and he didn't really was paying much attention to keep working. So he was sent many times to the hole. Now what Mark noticed is that the guy was never angry, and we heard stories about guards coming in with food and he being polite and saying thank you. It almost made Mark think that somehow maybe this guy wants to be there, because he was spent a lot of time there. Ultimately, Mark gets released, and he says, "I really need to get my life together, and I'm off to a new start." He managed to get his high school diploma during those years, and went to college and went to bartendering school. And as he was in bartendering school and going to college, his history professor was planning at the time to open a new nightclub, and approached Mark to say, "Mark, would you be willing to be the manager of our new nightclub?" And Mark agreed. Mark realized that from early times that it's who you work with. So he had 2 good friends from the bartendering school, and he says, "Would you like to join me and be part of my management team at this nightclub?" And initially they were really reluctant because they lived far away, but Mark had been given a mobile home as part of his compensation package. So, and Mark didn't want to live there, so he says, you guys can just live in the mobile home. So they agreed. So they started the nightclub, and the nightclub was a major hit. It was packed every night, very, very successful. But of course, this is the 70s, and most of the people going there had long hair and hippie life. So the conservative neighbors in the area were like freaking out, thinking that must be where all these drug things are happening. So they somehow managed to get the police in there to break in and see, look out for drugs. So they didn't find anything, but they went ahead and checked the mobile home. And the mobile home did find stuff that his friends were using, not him. So all of a sudden, Mark sees himself back in prison. His friends were from well-to-do families, so they managed to get some legal help, and they were out immediately. But of course, it wasn't the case for Mark. He had a long record of criminal behavior, so he was given a state lawyer. And the district attorney was really using Mark as a sign of how they were cracking down on drugs, and that they were not planning on doing any bargaining, and that they were going to ask the jury to have Mark be in a life sentenced to prison for life. He was so upset, Mark, thinking, hey, you guys can really tell the truth that it wasn't my drugs, but their lawyer said you cannot do that. So all of a sudden, Mark finds himself with the possibility of staying in prison for the rest of his life. And you can imagine the level of frustration, fear, and rage. So while he was in prison this time, he ran into this booklet, As a Man Thinketh by James Allen.
Oh, yeah.
And in there he starts reading about how your beliefs and your attitudes and your thoughts affect your experience, and how blame, resentment, anger are the worst destructive emotions that can really bring you to a life of scarcity and suffering, and how love is the highest consciousness, and how love can be the liberating aspect of whatever circumstance. So he started realizing that he needed a lot of forgiveness to do. And he started contacting, internally his parents, his friends, so many people in his life, and he realized that he was full of anger and resentment. So he started in his own cell doing a lot of forgiveness work, and doing a hobby that he developed during prison. The hobby was that he was playing poker. So he would be playing poker and doing, playing, but internally he would be doing forgiveness, a lot of forgiveness work. So you know what happened? He started winning. The more he forgave, the more he won. And that he didn't make money, but he got some script that would allow him to go and get stuff. So right after, this is just his own process, he gets transferred to another cell, and in that area he found another book. The book, Be Here Now by Ram Dass, and he read about the power of meditation and fasting. So he decided on going on a fasting experience for 10 days. And one day, on his 10th day, as he's meditating there, he noticed and he felt that something was getting out of the body. And he looked down and he saw his own body, but he was not that. That is so powerful that I'm even going to read from the book he wrote. He says, I then noticed that I seemed to be somewhere near the ceiling of the cell looking down. I soon realized that the body I was looking down upon was my own, and this other I was not located in the body. I realized I am not a body nor my conscious mind, which was attempting to forgive as best as it could, and yet it was still having thoughts of fear. I felt indescribable compassion in relation to my body and my conscious mind, as if these were the attributes of mine, which needed my acknowledgement from my elevated perspective. I became aware until this moment that I had lived with the underlying unconscious belief that I was fundamentally flawed. Because of this, I believed I deserved the pain and difficulty I had experienced. Now I saw that the person was not so much flawed as confused, helpless, and perhaps well-intentioned. Then, in the blink of an eye, I was back in my body, looking out at the area of the ceiling from which I had moments ago garnered this nearly incredible new perspective. A couple of days go by. He meets with his court-appointed lawyer from this different space and said, you know what? Even if you don't get me out of here, I realize it's not your fault. I am in such a place that I guess I will be able to survive if I have to stay here. So the day of the trial came, and he was standing there waiting for the hearing to start. And his lawyer approached the bench to talk to the judge and came back to Mark and said, "You are free to go." And Mark was like, "What?" He was stunned. He says, I'm going to quote him, "I knew I had changed, yet I haven't been prepared for such a dramatic result. I felt lifted by something I could not name. Again, I was filled with gratitude and wonder. Yes, I was free again, and this time I walked out, locked doors, never to be locked again." So what had happened was that apparently the search warrant they used to arrest him had missed something that made it illegal. And the lawyer, after Mark had had that conversation with him, one day in the middle of the night, woke up and went into some research and found a case that proved that he skipped that made the search warrant illegal. So this whole thing led to a journey of spiritual awakening that ultimately led it to unity. And he became a unity minister. And in the 90s, he went to Puerto Rico to the only English-speaking church there. That's the church that I was going to as I was becoming a licensed unity teacher. So he became one of my spiritual mentors.
Wow. Wow.
And I believe that he's one of the most powerful teachers we have in our movement. So if you think about it, Mark's story is our own story. We tend to develop a limited limited opinion of who we are, and then that becomes our point of reference, and we live life from there, from seeing ourselves as something else. And when it's too conflicting or painful, then we're moved to open and search something else until we get to that point. I believe there are certain points in our evolution where we just understand, and that's one of our powers, the power of understanding. It's not that comes to us, it's already there, but it awakens, and all of a sudden we get it, just like he did. So he interpreted a reality that, like I said, developed a sense of self based on that interpretation, led to criminal behavior to a point of great darkness. And what I find really fascinating, that even in the midst of what might have seemed a chaotic life, life was still offering him opportunities for something else, right? Finding those books, meeting Michael, and you see why Michael was important, until we get it. So there's so many lessons, spiritual lessons in this story, but to me the main one is how when we finally get it at the mind and the heart level, and we know that we are more than what our parents have told us about our personality, that we are really indeed that great being, that Christ said, that will never die, will always be, it's just as perfect as the universe itself, then everything shifts. We can never go back to who we were and what we were experiencing. So there are other lessons. Michael, you know how in life you might have an experience at a certain moment and then time goes by and then you realize why you had that experience. So Michael, what happened with Michael is that Mark had the opportunity of seeing him before his final prison break and this last security. He was able to meet Michael and he said, "Can I ask you something?" He goes, "Yeah." "Why did you spend so many time in that hole? I want to know." And I even want to make it more real, I want to quote what Michael had to say. He said, "Mark, I'm a student of spiritual teachings." Remember, this was an inmate, okay? "These teach one how, among other things, to transcend the mind. We must learn to calm our minds and our emotions, Mark, because what we think and feel is creative. We're always experiencing the results of prior thoughts and feelings. You and I," he continued, "have been experiencing some rather difficult conditions lately. I was tried, found guilty, and sentenced to prison for a crime I did not commit. On the surface, this seems unfair. However, I know I've been reaping the results of past negative thoughts and feelings. Mystical traditions teach meditation as a technique to transform the mind. I chose to freely go to the hole in order to have time to meditate. In deep meditation, we get to realize more and more that we are united with all of life, and that life is ultimately fair and very good."
Wow.
You've heard the story, the phrase that says, "When the student is ready, the teacher appears."
Yes.
So, but I must say, because, I've read the book, but Mark has shared the story with us, that Mark said, I heard that, and it went from one ear into the other. However, years later, when Mark had found himself being in prison unfairly, that seed made a difference. Another spiritual lesson that we see in this story is that when we are in the process of change, it's not going to be 100% rosy, right? Sometimes we go, "Oh, it's going to be all perfect." No. We might run into challenges and we get tempted to go back to our former thinking, to our default thinking. But then if we keep going forward and somehow saying, "This is not going to stop me, this is just one step in my process," and we come back to the truth like he did, there was good waiting on him. So keep that in mind. In the process of change, we will still find challenges. Another lesson is that when even before we get to that place of big realization, the universe starts showing us different things and different manifestations. And I find that very cute, that he was playing poker, doing all this forgiveness work, winning all the scripts to the point that he became the banker of the prison. You know, it's like, you see the correlation? The more you forgive and the more you release and the more love you bring into your awareness, the more you prosper. Right? It was not like his ultimately experience of realization, but it's just showing him somehow there's a connection as to how you think, how much you can resonate with love and prosperity. And another last lesson. I have seen in my life there are experiences where I say, experiences where being strong is your only choice. Have you been in an experience like that?
Yes.
You're either strong or you're strong. There's no other alternative. And I'm a believer that before big spiritual breakthroughs, you might find the peak of the darkness. We see it in nature. All throughout the night is dark, right? But do you know when the night is the darkest? Just before dawn.
Yeah, that's right.
It's just an analogy of our own process. So when you're in the peak of something, really just say, I'm about to go onto the other side. So really the conclusion, we have this power of understanding. And Charles Fillmore says that it doesn't necessarily start, but it takes place at the mind as comprehension, at the heart as realization. And when those two take place, there's insight, and you just know. And you find peace, and you're liberated. It's like we're gonna get there. Each one of us, this is what we're here for. The story might be different, the characters might be different, the time might be different, but this is all where we're headed. And I find it fascinating when you hear stories like this from people that currently are leading this movement, that have really come not necessarily from books, from the experience of finding that this truth that we teach, these principles that we teach, it's really the truth. So I just want to sort of like end by saying, Mark, thank you. I emailed him saying, I've been talking about you. Because, I have heard this story years ago, but the more you evolve, the more you're able to see the lessons and really the contribution to our own collective consciousness. So I would like to have a closure with you with prayer, if you would like me to. And I want to start by thanking all of my spiritual mentors and teachers that have been led my way. And I currently invite you to do the same. Just think of the people that somehow have brought light into your experience. It could be a book author, it could be your neighbor, a family member, a unity minister. Just hold it in your heart right now for their courage, for the willingness to keep working in spite of the darkness and the fear. Just being willing, just being willing to experience the good and experience the light and experience the wonder that comes from knowing who we really, really are. So I want to say thank you, Mark Pope, for modeling for us for trusting your life path, and for saying yes to helping others find their own. I love you and I bless you. I appreciate you. And I behold the Christ in you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So it is.